To talk with us about data and compliance, we're joined today by Daniel Petry, Senior Partner Account Manager at FormAssembly, and David Scovetta, Director of Security and Compliance at FormAssembly. Welcome, Daniel and David. Let's get started.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Dave, we know agencies collect a lot of data. How are they managing that volume? And what new standards are they expected to meet? How does that affect the way agencies collect and use data?
Great question, Lauren. So, agencies have a variety of complex challenges in front of them. Um, and generally, the outcome that they're looking for is really a centralized, well orchestrated way to handle complex interactions with their constituents, with other people within the same agency. And where a lot of agencies can run into challenges is through traditional paper-based and manual processes, but it's not just the intake, it's also what they do with that data once they have it. So if they have a number and variety of different systems, sometimes relying on older paper-based processes, um, the the challenge lies within once they get that data, how do they organize it? How do they respond to it and take action from it? Some of the newer regulations that have come out over the last couple of years, I'm not going to go into each and every one, but they're really centralized on a few central themes. That's focusing on a digital native experience, platforms that are unified and centralized, secure by design. They are well integrated. And the general purpose is to ensure that data collection is um, easy to use for constituents and agencies, that the data itself is accurate and it is streamlined from source to endpoint.
Why do agencies struggle to meet compliance and security requirements for data collection? What makes workflows less efficient and less secure?
Lauren, it's a great question in today's world. With cybersecurity, AI, all the penetration aspects, compliance and procurement challenges can really lead to bad digital experiences. So, procuring the compliance software can be a challenge for agencies, really at all levels of government. Often tools that meet the compliance requirements, they also require a substantial managed implementation process, and really are costly enough to automatically shift into an RFP process, which can, as we know, can slow the procurement process down significantly. Depending on the tool, procurement timelines can really stretch. Again, if you're looking at RFP, to more than a half a year to more than a year, sometimes in some cases 24 months. So it depends on how the implementation has occurred, the price points on everything else for the software, and whether it's compliant, because that's probably one of the major things. And those implementations, because really of their complexity, often are difficult to change and adapt to new projects. It makes for slow, costly, and really inefficient projects. And finally, really because of this, my thought is that some agencies make do with what is called, for lack of a better word, a shadow IT, and non-compliant tools that really allow them to move faster, but introduce a compliance risk. Maybe they're not FedRAMP high and whatnot, but it was just something that they could use as a stopgap. In today's world, that's unacceptable, and you really want to be aware of the possibilities, not only from compliance challenges, but how the experience, both internally and with your users is. So, important question for sure.
Many agencies provide direct resident services. How do outmoded data collection systems impact their ability to meet resident needs?
A lot of agencies right now have been operating over the years through potentially a number of different systems and processes. And this just could be that the agency has been around for a while. So perhaps some of their older legacy processes are more paper based and manual based. Maybe they have some newer systems, newer architectures. that are a little more digital first, but still at the end of the day, nothing is really collecting and aggregating that information together. And what that means for that particular agency is that where they are in a position to needing to help a resident, a constituent, whomever that end user is, it means they are looking through a variety of different systems and processes to try to collect the proper context to be able to really help that resident. So, a unified data collection platform can really streamline how that data comes in, allows the agency to operate more autonomously from a single source of truth, and really be able to reduce the time tax, I'll call it, that is the administrative burden to the agency, in really just operating towards the user's request or to the resident's request and getting them from A to B. Ultimately, if that information is more readily available to the agency and it's the context enrichment is already there within a single platform, it makes it easier to be able to provide the services that they really need.
At a high level, tell me how agencies can streamline their processes and address compliance and other concerns. What capabilities are important?
I think essentially you look at consolidation, standardization, and build in the security and compliance, really from the start. Secondly, you consolidate intake into a single platform rather than multiple platforms, which that in today's compliance world, the standardization into a single platform helps efficiencies across the board. Standardized processes, so support, maintenance, and compliance audits are easy. They can be difficult if the processes are confusing across different platforms. It's best to consolidate and standardize from that standpoint, especially if you're dealing with a platform that is compliant both in FedRAMP High, IL4, in my case, the DoD side of the equation, and of course, a procurement listing within like SAM.gov. Using and really using a single platform or as few platforms as possible, ensures that they meet the compliance requirements so that you don't have to have compliance requirements against a number of different platforms you go for. And basically, you want to enforce the adoption of a single tool to prevent that shadow IT and broken processes environment.
AI plays a role in many modernization efforts. How does it influence this solution?
Good question, Lauren. So AI is definitely kind of changing the world and how we operate quite a bit. For FormAssembly, we're looking at it, looking at AI, I'll say, through a particular lens. And our North Star has generally been, we want to improve the experience that form respondents. So this would be residents working with customers and agencies have when they are providing and submitting data. We want to have a more streamlined, well orchestrated, generally a really positive experience and seamless experience, because to these agencies, to our customers, and to the respondents, what's really meaningful is getting the data from A to B and be able to act on it pretty quickly and with the proper context, and really reducing that administrative burden. And we're moving towards that by enabling the use of our platform to actually build and deploy forms and start their journey on data collection using AI. And a specific example I can give you, one feature that we have is called file to web form. And fundamentally what this does is, if you have a repeatable process, maybe through an existing document where you are already collecting a known set of data from, let's say, residents in this case, you can actually submit that document template into your FormAssembly instance and generate a constructed form from that fundamental design. So in that sense, it moves away from the paper-based model. It streamlines and simplifies how the form actually gets architected, and ultimately helps to reduce the time between the customer or the respondent, the resident, asking a question and them getting the information they're looking for across the agency.
Can you share an example of how that works in practice? Take me from intake to workflow to outcome on a state-of-the-art data collection process.
A great example that I'd love to talk a little more about is a San Francisco-based public utility company that came our way. And generally, this organization had been operating in a similar manner that I've been kind of implying a lot of current agencies struggle with. Multiple sources of data ingest, some paper-based, some coming from a variety of different platforms. For an organization as large as this, getting data became a problem, and they were spending a pretty large amount of time just on aggregating and correlating that information when it came through. So there was a pretty high administrative tax on just making heads or tails of the data itself. Um, and I'm pretty happy with the outcome. They have moved over to FormAssembly, so they are able to operate from a more comprehensive and unified experience kind of across their platform. Another good example would be disaster recovery. So, for example, Executive Order 1458 explicitly covers streamlined online disaster recovery. And the general goal there is to ensure that affected citizens have a more expedient response to their ask for helps and their ask for loans to the to state and federal agencies. So when you think about how this relates to data collection, navigating that under that mandate can become kind of a daunting challenge. But it could also be streamlined under a more elegant and streamlined solution such as FormAssembly. So getting into the nuts and bolts of it, this could be the intake where the applicant actually receives a link to submit their request for a disaster loan, for example. There's conditional logic and a guided experience for the citizen to kind of go through and submit their application. There's real-time data validation so that if they're connected systems integrations, the right data goes to the right places. There's an opportunity for document uploads in case the citizen needs to provide anything else. Electronic signatures can be added, and ultimately the routing of the workflow can ensure that the individual gets a faster response to their request, and the agency spends less time kind of making heads or tails of that request and trying to piece together information from perhaps different systems, and can operate from a single unified request, make sure that certain data points go to their respective integrated systems, and that they can orchestrate and automate as much of that as they can, and that the administrators spend more time monitoring the forms, the responses, and the overall health of the process, rather than trying to collect information from a variety of different sources.
Dan, do you have a case study in which a specific agency successfully made the change?
I do. My background, of course, and really the kind of the vertical I handle is the DoD and the federal government side. And as you can imagine, it's highly structured. It needs compliance. It needs to meet certain requirements. One of the requirements that any software vendor has to make in that environment is you have to be FedRAMP high. IL4 types of security aspects. And again, I mentioned this before about the procurement aspects with the listing within SAM.gov or GSA. I think a good example would be the military education system. And from that standpoint, basically, a military academy, has specific needs, and it's generic throughout all the school system. You're tracking cadets, you're tracking educators, you're tracking what they're doing. You're making sure that the materials that they're receiving, it's all been integrated properly, rather than this form and that form and whatnot. You want to be able to have it seamless from that standpoint. And really, these forms are used really at the start of the applicants really kind of journey to become a student. And the use case for our commercial products, and like so many processes, it's the same really on the public side, with again that compliance challenge. The Academy uses FormAssembly to offer really a seamless, like I was saying, a seamless branded experience to applicants that kicks, a workflow that syncs the data, into Salesforce. In this case, it pre-fills known information into the form to improve the applicant's experience. Is also the submission of the data to make sure it's done properly and successfully, and it really alerts the needed internal departments for the application review inside of a secure FedRAMP authorized environment. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Basically what it does is that you want to have any kind of a form integration or data manipulation aspect seamless, makes the experience for the user and the experience for your data team and the people that are required as seamless as possible, as compliant as possible, and follow the new regs that are coming out, almost on a daily basis.
So, what best practices can you recommend for agencies that need to modernize their data collection? And what are some pitfalls they should avoid?
Oh, great question. Really, agencies that are modernizing data collection should start by really just is understanding and fixing the process, not by in this case replacing a form. Simple statement, but really it's a totally different approach mindset wise. They should first identify where data is being collected, who uses that data, where it goes, and where it gets stuck, and what happens. What are the security or compliance reviews that are required for that data? And again, when you have a number of platforms, it can be very confusing, and you lose the aspect of the compliance and speed and experience. From there, they standardize intake where it's possible. A best practice is to focus on the user experience as much as compliance, and that's sometimes ignored. If a form's too long, if it's confusing, the completion rates will drop, and then you get bad data. So that's aspect. A couple more would be agencies should really keep forms simple, role-based, mobile-friendly, and easy to understand. And as well, they build these forms with security and compliance upfront, and integrated within the form itself, the document. You don't want to concern so much on the form as you do the process itself. The form is just that vehicle that you can use, but it can also be a vehicle that will be non-compliant. And agencies should also prioritize quick wins. All right. Take a look at, rather than trying to transfer every workflow within their agency, start with high friction process. That is they get complaints about it. They get internal complaints, external complaints, and it's painful enough that, the improvement would be obvious, going forward. The second part of your question, I know that was rather long, but the second part of your question is, the biggest pitfalls, they're really usually predictable. One is you digitize a broken natural process without redesigning it. You're basically just painting over the problem. You're not addressing the problem. This creates, bad process. Another is over engineering, overthinking, too many fields, too many approval steps, or too much really customization, which really kind of slows the adoption, and it also makes the maintenance harder and the experience that people have with that document less. And I guess a third would be a failing to involve the actual program owners and users early. This is really important. Don't ignore the users. Don't ignore the people that are using your forms and using the process. Put them into the process, the decision matrix, and it leads to a workflow that not only looks good on paper, it works in the real world for, taking care of that user experience, making sure the data is done properly within your organization and its compliance. So those are my three biggest pitfalls that you have to avoid.
How does FormAssembly help agencies meet compliance standards and produce better outcomes?
Great question. So let me take a step back and first define what I think would be a better outcome, or let's say at least a good outcome. Um, I would envision that as a respondent to a form, in this case, again, a resident, citizen, whomever the case may be, has a really positive experience in terms of what they are seeking and how fast they get the answers that they're looking for. The better outcome on the agency side is they spend time building forms, crafting kind of the data they are looking to collect, and less time working the administrative overhead of trying to make heads or tails of the data after it comes into the system. So ultimately, if
Yeah.
everything is unified, the agency is well positioned to respond quickly based on whatever the problem or challenge may be. So ultimately, if you need to collect data, um, you're looking to consolidate that intake process. You're looking to streamline that in a centralized system. Perhaps you integrate it with other downstream systems so that everything is kind of fine-tuned and well orchestrated, and that agencies can focus more on responding to the end user rather than um, looking at spreadsheets or looking at paper-based forms or looking for the same user across multiple systems. And I think that's probably where a lot of agencies tend to get hung up. Um, but there's also a lot more to this than just forms. Um, when we think about it from a workflow perspective in terms of what leads an agency to better outcomes, there's a variety of things inherent to the form assembly product that does make it easier in reducing that administrative burden. So these are things like notifications, approval processes, electronic signatures, document generations, auditing and monitoring activity of forms, of health of the instance, kind of who's doing what and what forms are being created by who, so that these agencies can also kind of keep an eye on the overall health of the program and kind of making sure that they are doing right by first by their agency, but also by their constituents. And all of the above, it's kind of a nice bow on top that we can offer this in a compliant, uh, I should say, a FedRAMP and IL4 compliant solution, so that generally out of the box, it meets the standards from a security and governance perspective.
Okay. What two or three main points would you like the audience to take away from this discussion today?
I think that departments and agencies need to know that there are solutions to manual processes. So often, a department or an agency can become calcified to a certain degree, where they think that no, there's no solution. This is the way we've done it. We've looked at different ways to do it, and we really haven't found the solution. Well, that's really not the case anymore. With form assembly and in working within the public sector environment, um, you know, those slow moving, high friction processes, they may feel is about as good as it's going to get. And again, like I said, that's not the case anymore.
I would say that fundamentally, data collection doesn't have to be an inherently complex process. With the right tools and the right processes, this can be generally well orchestrated so that agency is an organization to like can focus more on operating on the data they collect rather than the tedium of correlating and aggregating data from different sources collected through different methods. So this allows smaller, more nimble teams to kind of punch above their weight class and fundamentally get more things done in a faster way if they can reduce some of the administrative overhead, and ultimately leads to a better experience to the constituents. And at the end of the day, I think that's really uh, the gold star of the better outcome. So I think once you look beyond the compliance and the security requirements, there's a simpler truth. People come to agencies because they generally need something, a benefit, a permit, a loan, an answer to something. That's what they're seeking. And a platform like FormAssembly really does help to remove that friction between the needs and the outcome. And it makes it easier for people to ultimately get what they came for, and it makes it easier for agencies to deliver it to their users. We see ourselves as the connective tissue in digital experiences, ultimately binding together different agency functions, collecting data and using it potentially for different purposes, but ultimately with the end goal, the North Star of helping to give answers back to their respondents in a quick and timely fashion.
So much to think about, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us, Daniel and David.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Appreciate it.